Dr. James Brown. He's an executive director of S.T.E.M Education Coalition, an alliance of more than 600 businesses, professional, and educational organizations. They work to raise awareness in Congress, the administration, and other organizations about the critical role that S.T.E.M education plays in enabling the U.S. to remain the economic and technological leader of the global marketplace of the 21st century. Prior to joining the coalition, he was Assistant Director for Advocacy at the American Chemical Society, a nuclear engineer by training. He previously worked as a legislative aide for Rep. Doc Hastings of Washington, was the Director of Policy Development for Consumer Energy Council of America, and began his career as an engineer with Newport News Shipbuilding, working on aircraft carrier construction. He received a BS from the University of New Mexico and an MS from Kent State, both in nuclear engineering. He also holds an MBA from George Washington University. Next, we have Robert Terry, theoretical and computational physicist. He's a subject matter expert on plasma physics. He is also a founding and lifetime member of the Mars Society. For a decade, he has volunteered as the Director of Aerospace Education for the Civil Air Patrol in Maryland. The highly successful Maryland Wing Aerospace Education Program spans cadet and adult training opportunities in more than 7 distinct activities. Supports STEM fairs like USA, SEF, and Rockville Science Day, and has brought STEM relevant talks and workshops to hundreds of audiences. Welcome, panelists. Thank you all for being here. I would like to start with a general question for each of you. Feel free to chime in as needed. My first question, as a science teacher to myself, is what do you think the general state of STEM education is in the United States as a whole, or regionally?
Well, I was a science teacher from 2004 to 2012 in the United States. And recently I live in England. I haven't been teaching in England, so it's been about 3 years since I've been in the teaching profession, and I do miss it. And my last position was a science teacher at 98% minority high school, economically disadvantaged students, and inspiring them about science was really important to us because they had come to high school without any previous experience in science at all as an elementary student. So as a science teacher, that was just a very difficult task and challenging to take on. So there's always room to do more in STEM, and there's always a need out there to do STEM. And I think from what I remember being in America, there is a disparity. So there's really great, well-funded schools who have these excellent STEM programs. And I'm originally from Silicon Valley, California, where there's a lot of funding and a lot of great programs. But I imagine that Silicon Valley isn't like the rest of the United States, and that isn't always available to everyone. And even though I was a teacher in Silicon Valley, the school that I taught at didn't always have the best programs or the best funding for the students that we had. But teachers always do the best that they can and do the best that they can with what they have. And with my experience in the Mars Society and having the support of Mars Society and having the support of NASA, we had the support of Google, sort of Silicon Valley, we were able to raise our freshman science scores up 7.6% that year. And that was a team effort. And it's always going to be a team effort. And having the support of industry, having the support of NASA, and having funding available to create programs for all schools, not just schools who are private schools and are fee-based, but of course public schools, and especially those with economically disadvantaged students or minority students.
that's a question that gets asked a lot in towns like this, and a whole bunch of different ways to answer it. The way I always put it is, we're doing okay in science as a country, but the trend lines are all headed in the wrong direction. And you can look at this in terms of things like test scores or international rankings. But one of the things that I think is the best measure of this particular notion of how we're doing science education or STEM education is where our role models are. And if you look at who role models for youth are in this country, you don't see enough people with science and technology backgrounds in that mix. And that's the biggest thing I think. When you ask science teachers, there are 3.5 million science teachers in the United States. Most of them are elementary educators, because almost every elementary school teacher teaches science in some form. But there are roughly 500,000 high school science teachers. And one of the things they talk about when you ask them this question is the lack of role models elsewhere in the educational experience and elsewhere within society. So, for example, in the accountability system that exists under No Child Left Behind, the current law on education, math and reading figure into the accountability system rather strongly. Science, while it's required to be tested, doesn't show up in the accountability systems in most state education systems. So the science teachers will tell you that they're competing for resources, competing for time and energy with other disciplines in the school that are considered more of a priority. So while you look at most of the metrics of those schools do quite well, and middle schools do okay, and our struggling schools do quite more than the rest of the So, we're doing okay, but the trend lines are not headed in the right direction.
As a volunteer in the Maryland and Mid-Atlantic regions, I enjoy, one, having something of a selective audience when we go out to deal with STEM. Civil Air Patrol has lots of STEM kits focused on aerospace education. So our audience selects toward people who are interested. When you're here in the Mid-Atlantic region, between Aberdeen down to Norfolk, you're awash, literally awash, in extremely fine, high-quality aerospace activities and aerospace knowledge. And partnering with AIAA, and partnering with the laboratories like NASA, Goddard, and things like that. You have more things to do than you can shake a stick at. So I would say that, from my perspective, it feels pretty robust locally, but you really have to understand that we kind of get the people who self-select, and we're trying to reach down deeper and deeper and trying to go to the homeschoolers and all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of depth there we haven't touched, and I'm sure we could do a lot better with them.
Thank you. So my big question, and this goes with everything you just said, are we, as a culture, creating intellectual curiosity in the students across the nation in order to get us to Mars, like the culture we created with the Apollo mission?
Well, that's a good way of asking the question, are we doing a good job? I think there's a couple different levels upon which I would touch. One of the more interesting phenomenon in education that relates to the STEM field is the role of laboratories in schools. So, laboratories forever have been one of the touch points for curiosity in the scientific method and teaching things in a hands-on way. And it turns out that today, with all the technology that we have, we don't have an answer to the question, what is the right laboratory or hands-on learning setting in any given educational space? So if you look at a modern high school, one of the most underutilized spaces in the school is the science lab. If you talk to high school kids, you talk to teachers, they'll say, I have a lot of capability, I don't really take advantage. I have equipment that's expensive, but I'm not trained to use it. I have students that want to try things, but not enough laboratory things. So one constraint on our curiosity metric, if you will, is the degree to which we actually understand and use hands-on science and learning facilities in our schools. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, if you go into a school in let's say, South Texas, like Gordon, where you have a lot of schools that don't have any laboratory facilities at all, first dollar, for example, the school has no hands-on learning. Now, one of the ways in which this is changing is there are roughly a dozen, I think it's actually 16 states now that have adopted the new next generation science standards, which emphasize, you know, the big, people talk about standards and they get debated on TV and you know, they're sort of buzzwords in political campaigns. People throw around the term Common Core and math and focus on reaction. But within the education establishment, when standards come along and change, there's usually some dominant theme. The theme around the changing science is inquiry-based instruction, which is basically the notion of teaching the scientific method in practice. We talk about the Socratic method, we talk about other methods of teaching. It turns out that teachers are actually poorly prepared, current, you know, body of teachers, to actually teach inquiry-based science. So one of the things I'm hoping, and this is sort of the early evidence is pointing in this direction, that teachers now who are being encouraged to use more inquiry in the classroom will help us stimulate some of the curiosity.
I would say that we're not doing a really great job at creating a culture of intellectual curiosity. We do a pretty good job at creating a culture of skill sets, and we create a culture of metrics of performance. But when you ask people to go into you know, inquiry-based learning and ask them, how would you tackle this problem? There's a weakness there. And on the other side of the coin, the extreme other side of the coin, there's a whole host of people who are very proud in their ignorance about science, and very proud in their ignorance to land-based science and deny it and make all kinds of crazy claims against it, both the methodology and the people and the results. So if you look across the culture, you know, it's hard to say we're creating a culture of intellectual curiosity. It may survive, and I think intellectually curious humans have survived and thrived in spite of what goes on in society at large.
So even though I live in England, I was just contacted by my former principal from the school that I worked at, and he said, would you come back to America and teach science again for us? And I said, I would love to. Of course, I can't because I live in England now. And I know that in California right now, and especially from the area that I came from, it's really difficult to get science teachers. So what happens is they get new teachers or not really prepared teachers or substitute teachers, and they really, like I agree with Dr. Brown, that the teachers aren't ready to inspire. They're too worried about what is it I need to teach today? I haven't even done a lesson plan today. I don't even know what I'm going to do in this classroom today. And that focusing on inquiries or intellectual curiosity isn't really on the top of their list. It's just how do I get through today? So one of the programs that we had at our high school was we brought in NASA at the end of the school day. And students would sign up for this, and that's where they would get their intellectual curiosity from. Or programs that I would participate in NASA Space and Found. And we bring teachers and scientists in the field, and the teachers are then getting that training that they need to take back to their classroom to inspire the students with. And it really is those rich experiential knowledge that teachers get firsthand, and then bring that back to the classroom and share it with their students that can create intellectual curiosity and other outside programs. Because teachers really need a lot of support in the classroom. Teachers, I think, they really focus on everything. They don't only just focus on the curriculum that needs to be taught, but did the student eat today? Are you awake today? Disciplining, classroom management is huge. You can't teach a class without classroom management, let alone focus on intellectual curiosity. And Nicole, I'm sure doing very, very well. So a lot of support is needed in extracurricular activities and outside activities. I know for myself, I had a fantastic teacher, which is why I studied geology, was when I was in 8th grade. I had a teacher who would take us out on the weekend So he would spend his own personal time, take us out on the weekends on hiking trips, camping trips, and would talk to us about biology and the earth, and that's where I got inspired and then became curious. And because that teacher took extra time out of teaching in the classroom, I became a geologist. That is really the reason I was inspired by a teacher who gave more of his time outside of the classroom to inspire me to study science.
Experiences like that really do inspire people outside the classroom, sometimes much more by far than in the classroom. Before I was involved with the Mars Society, I did a Robert Zubrin-inspired mission to Mars with all of my classes every year. My administration wasn't necessarily getting it because they're administrators of school. But when they saw it come to fruition and the news came and, put us on the news, they liked it because attendance went up because we're a private school. But it was an art project, and the kids loved getting their hands dirty, digging in the dirt, building volcanoes from scratch, building a whole mission to Mars. And I think art is very important when you mix it with science. So my question is, some people say STEM, some people say STEAM, with the A being art. How do you feel the arts can help STEM subjects or hinder them?
Thank you. So I started Marsonauts Incorporated back in 2008, and that was a project with an illustrator from the Cartoon Network. He worked on Adventure Time at then, and he's moved on within Cartoon Network. But and we collaborated with scientists at NASA Ames, and we created an activity book called Exploring Mars. And so Marsonauts came around, and we have future plans to create like a red and a green and a blue activity book and inspire young minds about humans to Mars, specifically humans to Mars, not just about the planet Mars, but about sending humans to Mars. And it's got a lot of interest. I recently was in London and met with Charlie Bolden, who was getting an award there at the Royal Academy of Science, and I shared what we're doing there with art. And he was very inspired by this work and wanted me to continue to do work like this, but in the UK, which is where I live now. I love STEM. I like the idea of STEAM, but what I really promote is teams. And I learned about this at a National Science Teacher Association meeting in California. And what I like about teams, which is technology, engineering, arts, maths, and science, is that it promotes collaboration, promotes working together. And as a former crew member of the Mars Desert Research Station, Crew 97, working together is absolutely essential if we're going to go to Mars. And working together is absolutely essential if we're going to solve problems. And working together is just helpful just to live on this planet. So that's what I promote is teams. And it's just an addition to, it's just exactly like STEAM. It has arts in there, but it just talks about working together.
There's a lot of debate in the education community about is it STEM or STEAM or let's throw all the arts. And I think there've been, if you read the opinion pages of some of the education publications, there's periodically an op-ed written by somebody arguing one or the other. And I think that sort of fuels the notion that it is one or the other. You're either for the arts or for STEM. I think one of the distinctions we always make in crafting policy is that STEM education, every school is a STEM school. We'll start with that notion. A lot of people ask us, can my school become a STEM school? My first comment is you already are. You're teaching math, science. You're teaching those disciplines. If you ask employers what kinds of skills they need, they're always going to make reference to things that we call design or aesthetics or senses of how things are built. If you look at the products that people enjoy, right? A car is much more than a function, right? People pick cars based on how they're designed, how they are functioning along with the person using them. So you can't but accept that there's a notion of art and design within any well-rounded separation between are we teaching art or are we teaching STEM, which is, I think, a lot of times the tone in which this gets discussed.
Well, I would say that from my experience, the STEAM, the art part of it, is remarkably hopeful, and if helpful, therefore remarkably important. I've seen so many examples when we bring little aerospace tasks in the programs, where that notion of pulling things together from disparate parts of your life. You're looking at an airplane up in a tree, and you can just decide that thing you use to figure out how high your rocket went, that technique will tell the NTSB guy standing to your left how high the plane is up in the tree. And the pulling of all these things together is very important. And there's an art to that which isn't taught. And there's an art to operating in the field, using your science in a way that it just comes to you fluidly. And that's not taught. So I think the whole notion of art and the whole notion of bringing things which aren't so precise yet into space exploration is extremely important. Notion of how you can get things visualized before you ever put the nitty-gritty in there to make them work completely. That whole genre we call science fiction, still very important, and I'd love to see a lot more strength in the arts community of understanding how to do the science and get that brought forth. I think we'll see some demonstrations of that in this meeting. It's coming along, but I think STEAM is very important. When I get wrapped around the axle on a problem, I always go back to what's gone before me in science and think about and contemplate the stories of people who went through and overcame difficulties and the real human experience of doing the science. And that, that's the important part of the art as well. So I say STEAM is very important.
I want to add that I actually have a graphic design background as well as a science background. So definitely, obviously art's really important to me. And then if you just think about what's inspired you, I think those things that have inspired us are based. For instance, Star Wars, right? That's part of art from films. And the movie Gravity. Those are all very artists, illustrators, cinematographers, et cetera, Those are inspiring, and then my students come and ask me, how did they do that? What did they do? And so that's art inspiring my students about science, about space, and so I think it's integral. And I also think industrial design is really important. You wouldn't really want to live in certain circumstances if I was going to live on Mars and being out at the Mars Desert Research Station was difficult enough. And what we always thought about was, well, it would be really nice to have some artwork in here. Or if I were to go to Mars, would I want a scene of Earth painted on it? Would that be helpful, or would that make me miss Earth if I was on Mars, living in a room on Mars with Earth or trees? Would it make me miss it, or what do I want? So what kind of art? That really helps us emotionally on a long journey to Mars. Art's going to be really important. Music's going to be really important. So definitely, inspiring our students and in space exploration, art is definitely an integral part of all of that.
Speaking of that, I got approval last year when the movie Interstellar came out to take the entire 100 students that I taught to the movie for 3 hours during the school day, which was wonderful, and they loved it. And we had a week's worth of discussion over how do you get through a black hole, and was that possible? So it was a wonderful way where art meets science. And typically through history, girls have been associated with art and English and the girly things, and boys have been associated with math and science. But that's not really true in reality. And we need more women and men think differently, and they do things differently. So we need to inspire more women, because men are already going into the field. We need to inspire more young girls who are going to become women to go into the STEM fields. So what kind of things do you guys see that may be happening to inspire young girls to go into STEM careers?
Recently, there we go. I started a new organization just this year, and I'm working with a planetary scientist, Dr. Jen Blank at NASA Ames, who's on the Mars Curiosity Science team, and Dr. Sandra Kaufman, who was on the Maven mission out of NASA Goddard here locally. And we're starting an organization called Women on Mars, and we want to promote just supporting women in team subjects, technology, engineering, arts, math, science, that promotes human space exploration. And I just finished on my flight over here. I was doing an Audible book, which is Sheryl Sandberg. She's the CEO of Facebook, and she wrote a book called Lean In. And one of the problems that we see here on this planet is, how are we going to inspire more women, or how are we going to change the world for equality for women? And the answer is very simple. Just women need to become leaders, take on leadership positions. It's that simple. More women in leadership positions. Women on Mars is very inspired by that. We also promote the idea of men taking a supportive role in promoting more women. Inspiring young girls who want to do science is very important to me personally. That's some of the work that I do with Women on Mars. And we want to create a whole culture. Mars is a blank slate. When humanity goes to Mars, it's going to be a blank slate and create something completely different, completely new world than what we live in here on Earth. And I want women to have a say in that. And that's also part of what Women on Mars is.
Yeah, one of the biggest challenges that the STEM fields face is this challenge that the workforce in the STEM fields is not representative of society at large. Just to put some numbers on this. So African Americans in the United States are about 11% of the population, about 3% of the STEM workforce. We say 50% of the population. They're a little less than 20% of the STEM workforce. Now, there are exceptions to this. There are some fields where women have made gains. There are actually some fields where there were more women in the past than there are now. So those numbers are all across the board. One of the things that we focus on when we're working within the policy-making process in Congress and federal law is to make sure that diversity is thought of as a core aspect of the STEM education pipeline, not as an and. In other words, we're trying to stay away from the notion that we need programs that are only focused on diversity in the STEM fields. Instead, it's the things like rules for federal grants and the requirements for how federal dollars are spent to be focused on making diversity a primary responsibility of programs to get people into the STEM fields. Because I think you're making a mistake if you think of diversity as something that you do in addition to your functions as an educator or as a scientist. I think it's important to make that a driving goal in terms of policies to do with the STEM education pipeline. So I think over time we're going to get a lot better at this. I think one of the ways in which things are changing with regard to role models is the portrayal of women and minorities in the sciences is changing. And partly it's changing because of how Hollywood and the entertainment industry are holding up role models in those fields. So if you look at the populations, for example, if you look at families that have never had an engineer in the family, you find that role models and mentors are incredibly important in governing those career decisions. So for most engineers, they have their father was an engineer, their mother was an engineer, they have somebody in the family. But in places where you have people who don't have that in their lineage, you find that mentors and role models are incredibly important. So one of our members is a group called the Entertainment Industries Coalition. And one of their roles is to provide good, concrete, real examples of actual scientists and engineers to portray within the movie industry. You'd be surprised if you think about the last several movies that you've seen, right? Movies like Interstellar do a great job, right? That's sort of the modern role, right? But think about the movies about science fiction science fiction 20 years ago, and how caricatured the portrayals of scientists were. Think about the movie Independence Day, right? So one of the things that I think is, we talk about policies and laws, and those things are things I think are changing to emphasize diversity is more valuable. We've also got to take that role on in our own sort of civil society by making sure we're exemplifying better role models and more active role models of science and technology.
Okay, there is actually a program at Air Force, and we're trying to sort of migrate into CAP as well, called Starbase. And it focuses on middle school students, in particular middle school girls. And that little window in middle school appears to be the target. You can get them locked into science there in middle school, you got them. If you wait too long, they'll get interested in dating and other things, and you're lost. And you have to re-get them. But if you get them in middle school, that's a really good time. But it goes beyond that. I mean, in American Physical Society has had a program about encouraging women physicists for years and years, and I've come up through the ranks in the sciences. And there's been a sea change in my time about how women are perceived in physics. And we've come to appreciate that there is a really interesting difference in thinking about how problems are approached. And I'm sure it's not unique to physics. And I'm sure there are lots of areas where the female perspective is not just an addition, it's a core advantage as to how you do the science. And it's a core advantage as to how you do the engineering. So I think there's a sea change. We people who actually do the work are coming to the appreciation that the female technique and perspective is a real valuable asset, not something you just sort of put on the shelf and say, yes, okay, I'm doing that. You really need to nurture it, and I think a lot of us appreciate that it's well worth nurturing. And so I think there's a lot of positive threads going on out there. When I do Mars Society, the STEM fairs, and have my booth out there, and we're throwing rocks and looking at how to do craters and the size of craters and all this stuff. And some of the young ladies are the ones who take the lead. And when I have some cadets out there, we're looking at the triangulation for the altitude of the rocket. These guys are getting wrapped around the axle on their trigonometry. I get to point out that your young friend over there, your young lady, ask her about the trigonometry, and they're quite embarrassed to notice that she's doing a better job. So, and it's good. It's a good embarrassment. It's a good learning moment. So there's a lot of strong folding in of the female perspective in the science and engineering. Very encouraging, I think.
So I agree with Dr. Brown and good point, Bob. I agree with Dr. Brown about female role models. And one of the role models that we unfortunately lost recently was Dr. Sally Ride. And she was very inspirational. And one of the things, as part of the NorCal chapter of Silicon Valley, we always did the annual Sally Ride Festival. So you get lots of girls that came to NASA Ames, and we would bring out our little rover, and we'd interact with girls. And it was just really great to see them take on these interests in engineering and in robotics and science. And another thing that we would like to do as Women on Mars is promote teamwork with women, or with girls, with young girls. I really think, personally as myself, I was inspired really young. My father was an engineer. He worked for Lockheed Martin, a contractor at NASA Ames, actually. And I had a lot of really fantastic experiences just of all the festivals that NASA would have. And I remember even hot air balloon rides inside Hangar 1, and the space shuttle tiles coming off the conveyor belt. Those are really good experiences I had as a really young girl, and I was really fortunate to have a father who could give me those experiences. And I think even if your father doesn't, you can always have role models as your teachers. Your teachers are your next role model, or have a family, another family member. Just do things with girls and take them to events like this that you have locally to inspire them. But specifically with Sally Ride Festival to promote science and engineering with girls, and that's something that Women on Mars also wants to continue and participate in. is if you're going to have a robotics group or an engineering group doing a challenge, we want female leaders. We want young girls to be the leaders of teams. And of course, boys and girls can be on that team. We want girls to lead those teams.
Thank you. One of the biggest challenges I've noticed is in the education system is getting parents and teachers to be on a team together. Many times teachers have all these wonderful ideas and the parents are like, I got stuff to do, and it's not bad. So can you discuss the biggest hurdles teachers face in regard to promoting STEM, and as well as a parent asked me earlier today, how can parents access more STEM resources for their children? Because they're out there, I know they're out there, but unless they're actively looking for them or they know exactly where to find them, it's not very readily available.
Hello, I have two nieces, and every year they have birthdays, so I have to think of what am I going to get them. And one of the really cool current things that's out there is called Tinker Crate. I think it's a company called Koala, I think, or Kiwi Crate. And so they create these little boxes full of things that you can do that you get every month, and you can create a circuit or do some little tiny rover or something, and that just inspired the girls about doing engineering and science.
Well, the field of teaching has gotten really complicated. This is one of the things that's changed just in my lifetime. If you think about how we perceive teachers and their role in society, it's really changed a lot in the last 40 or 50 years. The profession of teaching is thought of as being less professional. This is a very common element of public perception of teachers. And this sort of wrapped up in this debate about where our priorities fall. But if you ask teachers, the National Science Teachers Association, one of the founding members of our coalition, they actually chair our board of directors. And one of the most common, I'll talk about two challenges I think teachers have in the modern world. One is the use of technology. I sort of alluded to this earlier when I was talking about laboratories. One of the biggest decisions that educators, whether it's administrators, principals, or district superintendents, deal with everybody in the education system. One of the most complex decisions they make is about what kind of technology to buy for the classroom. And so many people in education are poorly prepared to make these very large capital decisions about what kind of technology to buy and how to use it in the classroom. You only need to pick up the newspaper and read about the disaster stories of places like the LA Unified School District and how they tried to acquire a huge amount of they were iPads for the classroom and got involved in contract disputes and other things like this. So one of the most fundamental challenges that the education system has is how to take advantage of technology in the classroom. And a common challenge that a teacher will have nowadays is trying to find the right YouTube video. It's surprisingly difficult to sort the wheat from the chaff in terms of trying to find a relevant, very well-designed, well-evaluated piece of curricular material to illustrate a particular subject when you don't have a uniform rating system or you don't have large networks of teachers sharing the information, saying, well, here's what worked for my classroom. So that whole category of taking advantage of technology is one of the biggest challenges that teachers face now, not just STEM teachers, science teachers, it's all forms of teachers. But so that's one particular challenge. The other challenge I put on the table is that the field of science in particular is changing faster than the education system has changed. One example of this is the fact that computer science, up until recently, wasn't considered either science or math in most school systems. Think about that, right? You're in the California school system and you don't recognize computer science as a course credit to count towards graduation in science. And that's a field that really didn't exist, but 30 years ago as a common field, and who knows, 30 years from now we may call it something completely different, but that's the time scale in which education. So that's the other challenge that teachers have, is being able to keep current in an area where the education system changes very slowly. And one comment about parents. One of the areas where STEM is expanding the most rapidly right now is in the after-school, informal, out-of-school domain. Something like 70% of after-school programs now focus on science or one of the STEM fields. It's something that a lot of parents are now asking about and thinking about. Because a lot of times the focus on science in the after-school terrain is partly because there's not enough time during the school day to focus on it. So you tend to see that as a relief valve. But one of the other aspects of it is you can do things in the after-school space that you can't do in the classroom because you don't need to take tests, you don't need to measure the results, and you're not holding students or teachers accountable for it. So that's an area where you see parents getting more involved because they might be required to buy something for the after-school program. That's a model with a lot of after-school programming going on. And that's going to be an opportunity where when the parent, think about this for a second. If your kid's in an after-school program, you're not going to see the teacher at the end of the day, but you are going to see the after-school educators when you go to pick them up. So that's another opportunity to interact with the school that is now becoming more valuable in this day.
I would say that one of the biggest problems in the volunteer aspect is just cat herding. There are so many things on the plate here in this neck of the woods in terms of children's schedules and parents' schedules, and we'll fly a teacher and we'll have pilots ready. They've been ready for weeks. It'll take the teachers about 6 weeks to decide which of 5 dates they might get some teachers together to do such things as fly with us. And similar things occur when you're trying to do, model rocketry or Team America rocketry competitions. Everybody has got something higher up on the schedule that always competes. And that's one of the biggest hurdles. The other thing I found that we've had a very good experience as a partnership program with one of the local middle schools where people from industry come and try to help mentor the teachers and the students to do projects. And apart from the problem of deciding what to buy for your laboratory, there comes a problem of how to use it. And many people start children on projects, and nobody in the system that they're at the school has a clue about how to actually calibrate a measurement or try to actually understand what the limits of measurement are. So you go into the middle school or the high school, and they're all working on this, what could be a grand and interesting project, but they don't know the limits of their equipment. And the teachers aren't that aware of the limits of their equipment, and they're not really prepared to say, okay, you can do this, but we've got to spend a lot of time calibrating this technique, improving this technique, if you expect to be able to resolve what you're going to resolve. And so that's one of the challenges I see a lot. The teachers don't understand calibration, they don't understand the limits of measurement, and they sometimes let students get off on tracks which don't have a lot of hope and are therefore going to run aground and give the student a sour experience. But in contrast, or on the other side of it, a sour experience is part of being a scientist. Things don't work the first time, the second time, and maybe the 20th time. So you just have to get used to it.
Thank you, Bob. Last comment.
Okay.
Coming up on lunch, and I know
That was
everyone's
it.
hungry.
So I just realized, I apologize for my answer was a bit truncated because at the end there I was thinking, what was the question again? so I mentioned Teacher Crate as a valuable organization out there that parents can go to get resources for their child at home. But also parents, if they just get out and do some fun science stuff, just on their own, then they have this experience that they can bring back. If they joined us at a NASA Space Rebound, then they'd have these stories or anecdotes, or they'd learn new things that then they could bring back. And this is especially important for those parents who aren't scientists or engineers. to go do something fun that inspires their curiosity about science and engineering, and bring that home and share and inspire their own children about that.
Yes, Dr. Lieber.
Yeah. Before I became an engineer, I was a teacher for about 7 years. And I taught in a variety of schools, some very good ones, and some very bad ones, and a number that were in between. And one thing I discovered, and you can absolutely take this to the bank, is that anybody can teach kids who want to learn, and nobody can teach kids who don't, period. And it doesn't matter whether you're using chalks or iPads, although we didn't have iPads then, but I guarantee you they did not have work in one of the schools that I taught in. And right now, okay, they have this testing craze going on, and Colorado is spending 20% of class time on tests, standardized tests. There's even an organization, how did your school do on the test, rate your school? I did a study of the test results, and I found that it was absolutely predictable what the rating of a school would be based on the average income of the parents of the teachers, of the students rather, in the school. I actually was able to write an equation that predicted it. And this is because higher income parents are generally people who are more educated and therefore have a greater appreciation of the value of education in life, and that is conveyed. But look, in the 1960s, during the Apollo period, the number of science graduates in this country doubled at every level, high school, college, PhD. And it wasn't because we got better chalk. It was because Apollo made science the great adventure. Okay? That's what it was all about. Youth loves adventure. Adventure is the spirit of youth. Okay? And Apollo made science the great adventure, and kids who wanted adventure wanted to become scientists. Okay? Astronauts, astronomers, space explorers, rocket men. They wanted to be part of this. This was the great adventure. This is why I got into science. I am unusual among my compatriots in that I actually ended up doing space. But, okay, how many of those 40-year-old science geeks who built Silicon Valley in the 1990s were children of Apollo making rocket fuel in the basement in the 1960s? Okay, I would bet you quite a few. The real spin-off of Apollo wasn't Teflon or microelectronics. Okay, though some of those things actually came from Apollo funding. But the real spin-off was the intellectual capital that was generated by inspiration. And look, the reason why I want to have a STEM thing at this conference and why STEM is an extremely important aspect of the push for Mars is because the push for Mars will do vastly more for STEM education in this country than the current testing inquisition. Okay? Or any other way, I mean, testing inquisition is negative. It's destroying education. It's a disaster. Okay? But there are other things that you could spend money on that would help education, but not as much as this, because anybody can teach kids who want to learn, and nobody can teach kids who don't.
Yeah, if I might, my dissertation advisor brought me in toward the end of my time with him, and he had a quote on the wall on a chalkboard, old chalk, I presume. And he said, "Education is useless, except in those cases for which it is superfluous." And it's never been false in my experience. You know, when you get somebody who actually takes the route and takes a bit and goes with it, and when you have somebody like that, you can barely stop them. Never mind, actually have to drag it out of them.
Thank you, Bob. I can take one question, and then that's it. Sorry, go ahead.
Have any of you worked with, either one type of mission? One would be where you're working with government to get R&D tax credits for organizations that put in scientists and engineers into a public classroom. The second one would be more of the incenting the teachers in a public school system to do the after-school programs because they're paid like a coach to do a sport.
Those are actually interesting topics, and there's a really the problem of getting volunteer scientists or people after work or people from companies into classrooms in a productive way is a really tricky problem to solve. A lot of companies have tried this on their own and had all sorts of different degrees of success. IBM, for example, endowed 100 scientists about 8 years ago to go spend 3 years in a classroom, and they had all kinds of problems finding placements for those people, finding, you know, that the people would go into the classroom and want to immediately get back out because they didn't feel like they were prepared to be there. That's a very tricky problem to solve. And the whole question of how do you facilitate more corporate involvement in education is a lot deeper question than just the incentives themselves, in the sense that, like, to go back to the laboratory question, for example, we worked on a bill in Congress a few years ago that was designed to give companies, somebody had an idea of giving them a tax incentive for donating laboratory equipment to the classroom. And that turned out to be a really complicated area of public policy, because how do you know they're not donating their trash? How do you know what the value of that is? How do you know that the school has the capability to use it? So that is an interesting debate that nobody has really come up with a good solution writ large. The only area where there does seem to be widespread agreement is on what might be called alternative certification of science folks. So if you look at the Great Recession, you had a crop of people who were laid off in industry that were considering going into teaching, and a lot of states have actually done a fairly good job of building a pipeline so that you could reasonably go to some form of appropriate pedagogical training, you know, maybe over the course of 6 months or a year, so that you were prepared to go into the classroom. But that turns out to be a much more complicated problem to solve than sort of it would look at first glance.
So I went to graduate school in Scotland, and as part of my studies, we had to become a UK STEM ambassador, which I don't know of a program like that in the US at all, but what we had to do is we had to be completely vetted. You know, we had to have a background check and et cetera. And then, you know, they understood that we were part of a science affiliation at a university. And then they had this whole process, this whole setup. It was very organized. Website, UK STEM ambassador, and where teachers would say, hey, this is what we need. We need someone to come in and talk about engineering. We need someone to come talk about science. And we would just sign up. So it was like a pool of, it was an area where teachers can tell us what we needed. We were all vetted and qualified, and we just signed up and then went there. So that was a really great program in the UK. Do we have anything like that in the US?
I'm not sure if we have that exact type of program. I do work sometimes with an organization called NEPRIS, and it's very similar, except we do it online. So people, I go kind of like Skyping, and I talk to the whole class, wherever it is in the world, in the United States usually, and I'll do a presentation about Mars or the solar system. And they have a whole list of people that are professionals that have been vetted that talk about STEM subjects to various classes all over the place. So that's the one I know, that's the one I'm aware of. But we're kind of over time, so anything pressing?
I would just add
Quickly.
to that AIAA is one organization which all across the country has a lot of strong programs with speakers and stuff done at the public level for adults and for school-age children. So that's one example similar.
Okay, thank you, and we can maybe get a list together and publish that on the education website, education, marsociety.org. Thank you, panelists, and everybody.